Hi there, I'm Gnome, and welcome to a tutorial for using RSNextGen version 1.2. As this update was fairly major and changed a lot of things about how the terrain generates, I figured a proper video tutorial was due. First things first, you're going to want the three main downloads, the blend file itself, and two text files, which I know how strange that sounds for a Blender project, but they're important for organizing our asset manager or catalog later down the line. Also, obviously, you want Blender 3.1. Might work as well with later versions. We'll just have to see as they come out. Other than that, probably about 50, 60 megabytes of space. Yeah, I am recording off my laptop here, which is not the most powerful device ever, which goes to show that most devices can probably run NextGen fairly seamlessly. You might notice a bit of lag, but you may just have to deal with that, reduce the number of objects you use, that sort of thing. So to get started, this is what your setup is going to look like when you first open the program. Yep, basic Blender controls. Basic Blender controls, I'm not going to go through, but if you can rotate your camera, use your left mouse button, zoom, pan, all that stuff is pretty handy to know. So first off, we're just going to make sure that our landscape is selected, or is the last thing we select. Again, if you haven't used Blender much, if you select something else, that's going to cause a bit of trouble, so select the landscape and select away. I'm actually not going to use the Arctic setup here, as it uses some advanced terrain controls I don't really want to deal with yet. So I'm actually just going to change over here, and you can see all our presets for 5 different biomes I've constructed for you. Biomes, unlike version 1.1, aren't automatically constructed. There's many reasons for why that's changed, but now I've got a couple of presets you can use. So let's just switch over. I'm just going to remove it from view and remove it from render. And let's enable the wilderness preset here. There we go. I'm also going to change the controller we're using from the Arctic preset to the wilderness preset. If you want to start from scratch, there's a blank version of the document. However, I don't usually use this. I usually like to work off something else to give me a nice point of reference. So again, let's just make sure that we have the one that we actually want to change visible and enabled for render, which is just activating this little camera guy here. Again, make sure it's the last thing we selected, and you'll notice that the geometry nodes corresponds to the preset that we've enabled. So I've enabled the wilderness preset, and therefore the geometry nodes wilderness shows up here. There's a couple different ways of modifying your landscape, so we'll start with those landscape controls first. Oh, before I even get to that, let's make sure that our asset manager is using those text files that you downloaded. So I'm just going to hit edit up here, preferences, and under file paths, you just want to make sure that the file showing here is the folder that you've placed your 3 downloads in. For myself, it's my documents folder that I've thrown these 3 files in. For you, it might be something else. Moving on, yes, our terrain modifiers. There's 2 different ways of modifying the terrain. First, you have your modifiers here, which are under the Modifiers tab. We'll get to those in a bit, but the simpler one is our controller. Again, making sure that the appropriate controller has been selected. We are modifying the wilderness preset, so we're going to be modifying the wilderness preset controller. So you can select it from up here, or you can just select it out here. Think of this controller as changing the camera view of our landscape. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but this landscape is already constructed, an infinitely massive one. We can change the location of this controller to change where this camera is viewing, like so. Now, usually when I change it, I'll hit G, and I'll lock it to either the X or Y axis. So I'm just going to lock it to the Y axis here, the green axis, and I'm going to change it just along that axis there. Just makes it a little easier to control. I'll hit right click to undo that, or to cancel it. I'll hit GX to move along the x-axis. So a couple axes of motion that you can use with this controller here. You can also press S to scale, which stretches out the land or brings it in. And you can hit R, and usually I'll hit R and Z to lock it to the Z axis to rotate the landscape. Like so. Notice that all the objects are regenerating each time we make some sort of modification like this. So I always do the terrain first before the objects. All right, let's just move that. Let's get something a little more interesting here. Sure, this looks perfect. Okay, now notice that my Modifiers tab has disappeared. That's because the last thing I've clicked is the controller and not the landscape. Just going to select the landscape again, select away so we get rid of that orange outline there. We'll just zoom a little here. Okay, now we get to our Modifiers tab, and we can change a large number of parameters here. This is where most of your modifying is going to be done. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger here, a little bit bigger on the side so I can read everything properly as well. First is the world size, which, as it suggests, changes the size of the world by adding tiles to the edges. At a world size of 1.000, this is the size of one OSRS map chunk, so 64 by 64 tiles. I usually leave it at default, especially because I'm on my laptop. I don't want to go too extreme. I used to lock it at 2, but then people just wanted to go above that, so it's now unlocked. Yeah, pretty simple. Next is the land select. So this is where we're going to start diving into our asset manager here. So the asset manager contains pretty much all the objects and all the shaders, the sort of like the textures for the landscape. If you scroll through the tabs here, you'll notice all our different objects and a quick preview of them. Those are going to be more relevant later, but let's stick to materials, land for now. Now what you can do from here, this is really cool. You can actually just pick one of these up and drag it over to the Modifiers tab, drop the name in the appropriate box, and the landscape will change appropriately. It's pretty cool. Let's see. Let's go with a... No, I just had wilderness. Let's go with a woodland. Keep it nice and simple. All right, next is going to be our water type, which, as it suggests, changes the texture or color of the water. A couple presets: water, lava, swamp, infernal cape, the swamp on Fossil Island, and the weird, spooky river on Zaya in the Arceus region. Let's stick to something nice and simple, nice and clean, regular water. Shore contour changes how the shore is contoured. So you see the line drawn by the shore here. You can kind of change the formula for which that's generated. So this will make it a little bit smoother, this a little bit rougher, a little bit more uneven and jagged. I'm going to keep it around, I actually like the higher numbers here. 0.7 is pretty comfortable. Next, the cliff type, and this is where we run into the first bug, or the only real bug that I know of, in that we want to change the color of this cliff overlay here. It's kind of gray. I'd rather change it to a brown that kind of matches the woodland. However, this doesn't actually change anything. You can blame Blender for that. My workaround is that the one thing that does control it is the blank version. So if you change the cliff type for the blank version, the main geonode, it'll change appropriately. Let's see, that looks pretty good. Cliff type 5, they go just up to 8 here. All right, now just making sure that I click back on the current landscape and not stay and make modifiers on the blank landscape there. Again, the only reason I've used the blank landscape is because the cliff type is bugged. Cliff edge contour, just like the shore contour, changes the formula for how the cliff is shaped. I usually like it a little bit lower here. Sure, that looks perfect. Water height doesn't so much change the water height, I suppose. It changes the rest of the landscape height, and anything below 0 is qualified as water. So let's just change that a little bit around. I want a little more land, maybe a little puddle in the middle there at the base of this little depression, I suppose. Peak height pretty much stretches all the land. And you notice that the overlay, the cliff overlay, is applying automatically. We're going to be changing that in a little bit. There we go. Some nice rough woodland terrain. I think the cliff overlay is a little too extreme here, so I'm going to tone that down in a second. And now we get to advanced terrain control, which the reason why I chose this woodland preset is because it has advanced terrain control disabled. Now, if you enable it, you're going to want to be making some changes, some extra changes to the terrain. I'm not ready to handle that yet. We'll get back to that later. If this is your first time using the program, highly recommend you just leave that. You just leave this at 0 or off. And if it is off, these basic controls down here, you can then change these, and they will make impacts on the landscape. So maybe let's change the terrain roughness a little bit. It's a bit much. Let's smooth it out just a bit. Oh, I kind of like that. Peak sharpness. This is not the best way to describe this. In fact, I don't know how to describe this, so let's just leave it right about there. Terrain stretch, kind of like scaling our controller. Where'd our controller go? Up here. Kind of like scaling our controller. This changes the stretch of the landscape, or can bring it all together. Now, the origin of the stretch, as you'll notice as I'm modifying it, is from where the controller is located. So when I start to change it, it'll stretch in this direction here. In fact, the controller is so far, the whole landscape is shifting quite a bit. So maybe let's just not touch that. Terrain distortion is a fun one. You can make your terrain all twisty in the negative and positive directions, and if you really want, you can make it rather cursed. Yeah, pretty much distorts, twists, and warps the landscape. I'm going to leave that relatively low. And cliff overlay sensitivity. So cliff overlay is automatically applied when a certain steepness of slope occurs. So as you can notice right here, the slope is relatively steep here, and therefore the cliff overlay applies on top. You can change how sensitive that cliff overlay applies to the landscape down here. So not very sensitive to not sensitive at all the way to everything is cliff. I want to tone that down just a little bit maybe. Oh, and I completely forgot remove cliff by size. That's kind of important. Let's make this, there we go. Right there. Okay, you see how this piece right here has been created. Maybe that's not the best example. Let me just distort the terrain a bit so I can get a better example for you. There we go. Okay, here's a good example. I'm going to change it back because I really don't like this. But let's say I don't want this piece right here. And it's more important for these small little pieces that'll randomly spawn because the steepness of the slope has increased a sufficient amount in a very small area. But let's say I really don't like this piece right here and I want to get rid of it. You can actually do so by changing remove cliff by size. I don't know why I have it set by... Okay, so when you increase this size, more cliff overlays will be removed. And if I keep increasing it, you notice I reach a certain point, which this big piece is being removed. I can continue to increase it, until all the cliff is removed. Might get to dangerous values here. Oh no. There we go. All right, there you go. All the cliff has been removed because we set this so high that it detects every large cliff overlay piece and takes it out. Anyway, I don't really want that. Let me just undo a couple of those. There we go, back to a little more natural landscape. So those are all our terrain modifiers. Again, the controller, if you ever lose the controller, you can also just open it up here, click controller, and it'll find it for you. I'm just going to move this down just a bit for now. Yes, so our two main ways of modifying the terrain are controller and the terrain modifiers, which are these top ones right here. Now, we get to the more nitty-gritty, which is actually choosing which objects are going to be spawned on this landscape. So I've currently set it up, the preset, to be a very wilderness land. That's a lot of skeletons. Wow. Right, I've currently set up the preset for the wilderness to be a very wilderness sort of biome. It has very wilderness type trees and rocks and roots and all that, even some of these little geysers. I want to change that to a nice calm woodland setting. So when we start to get to the object modifiers, they're usually divided into 5 different pieces. So the collection, which describes which object we're choosing, align to slope, which tells it whether to bend or rotate the object so that it contours nicely to the surface of the slope. The number, which as it says is the frequency of those objects occurring. The scatter, which determines the spread or clumping of these objects. And move, which just moves the objects in the X or Y direction. So you can see we're currently moving in the X direction. Note that the Z move does not work. It doesn't do anything it's not supposed to. Yes, so objects are all divided into certain categories, and these categories are very important for describing priority. For example, what happens if this root and one of these rocks tries to spawn in the same spot? Well, we can't have both unless they're a very specific type, a type 22, which we'll talk about later, these little rock slide guys on the ground. But one has to win out over the other, or else you get all these objects colliding and overlapping and clipping with each other. So the two determinants which tell you which one will show on top are size, which is small, medium, or large, and alphabetical priority, so A to G, I believe. So larger sizes always win out. Large size occupies 3 by 3 tiles, which let me see if I can find. Yeah, so you can see 3 tiles, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This root is 3 by 3 tiles. Medium objects occupy 2 by 2 tiles. This tree right here, 1, 2, 1, 2. And small objects occupy 1 tile, like these little rock slides here, or let's see, each of these, each of one of the swarm of skeletons occupies just 1 tile here. So larger objects will always win out over smaller objects if they're competing for the same space. Now, what if 2 large objects are colliding with each other? Priority is determined by alphabetical. So A objects will prioritize over B objects, and B objects will prioritize over C objects, so on and so forth. So what happens, so again, size is the bigger determinant of priority. A large A object will prioritize, a large B object will prioritize over a small A object, for example. So very important to understand your priorities because that will become very important in a moment. All right, let's actually start changing something. These large roots, I don't want to be dealing with these, so I'm just going to take our asset manager here. And I'm going to find our large 3x3 objects. And you can see they're divided into rocks and trees because there's no other large 3x3 objects. This is a woodland setting, so let's go with an oak tree. I'm just going to pick it up and drop it into our collection here. There we go. All our roots have turned into oaks. Now, one important thing to notice here is some of these oaks are a little bit slanted. In fact, if I increase all of them, well, it's still kind of hard to notice actually, but you can see they're contouring to the slope. That's okay for a rock or a root or maybe even a geyser, but trees normally stand up straight. So I'm just going to change align to slope to off. So on, off. And I'm going to decrease the number. 1 is the maximum that can spawn, and 0 is the minimum that can spawn. So I don't want too many of them. Oaks are a little rarer than normal trees, which we'll get to in a bit. And I'm just going to, maybe I'll show them extremely organized so you can see how much they're clumping when the scatter is reduced. And when the scatter is increased, they start to spread out more. So I want these oaks spread out quite a bit there. Actually, I'm going to reduce the cliff overlay sensitivity just a bit. Yeah, it's just a bit much for me. There we go. I like that a lot better. And I can move them all. Movement is more predictable when there's a large number of those objects or when they're not scattered so much. So again, you can see I'm moving in the X direction here. Notice that some trees will just straight up disappear for a while before respawning. That's just kind of how the world is generated due to everything having to be locked to a grid. Kind of messes with a lot of how the world generates, but it's fine. It works for a static scene. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, probably good to speak about blank collections. You can fill them. Absolutely, you can fill them. So I can take my yew trees from down here. Let's see what I have for rocks. Well, kind of like Arctic and desert rocks. Let's stick with the yew tree. You can fill these, or you can leave them blank. If you leave them blank, make sure you put the number back at 0. Because, as you can see, these objects will still technically spawn if you change this. Even though no object is visualized, these objects will spawn and take the place of smaller objects. So if you leave something blank, just leave the number at 0 and the scatter at 1, and that will reduce some generation time and not mess up all your smaller objects. Maybe I don't want a yew tree. I'm just going to skip that. All right, moving to medium objects. So medium object priority A. Let's just open up our medium objects down here. What do we got? Let's choose one of these subdivisions. A lot of objects to take in at once. All right, medium trees. I've got a good selection here. How about we go with these regular woodland cone trees? Place those there. Whatever was there before, I think it was just some wildy rocks, has been replaced by these medium cone trees. Again, looks like they're aligning to the slope. I don't want that. I don't want my trees that haphazardly placed. Let's put those back. Perfect. And again, I'm going to change. I can play with the number, make as many as possible, make a lot fewer. The scatter, you'll make them clump a little bit more to one side of the map. All right, and maybe I'm just going to make them, yeah, let's just fill this hill with regular cone trees. Perfect. Now, you may have noticed that there's another kind of normal tree down here that isn't being placed, that normally goes alongside these cone trees in the real game world. I kind of want them to be together. Now, I can't just go to the next priority down, medium B, replace it with these woodland double trees, and you can see they spawn right there, make them not aligned to slope. And I can increase them just to show exactly what I'm talking about. These guys usually go with cone trees. Now, for simplicity's sake, and also for the sake of things mixing a little bit nicer, it would be nice if there was one controller that determined both these woodland cone trees as well as these woodland double trees. We can do that. Something in here. Now, you can't always just search for the object you're looking for. So if I know I want a medium tree, I can click right there. And immediately you'll notice a couple different colors of categories. If you see any red collections, any of these little red boxes, don't touch those. Those are not for you. If you see white collections, those indicate that there's only one item that will spawn from there. And if you notice these blue collections, these are mixes. So these are stuff that I've put together that when there's objects that are super close to each other or so frequently placed together or mixed in with each other, I place them in these things called mixes. And they're pretty much just different collections of objects that are nearly identical or often go together that can make setting your scene a little bit easier and allows you to intersperse these two different objects a little bit cleaner than by using two different collections. So I'm actually going to change this to med tree because we're dealing with medium objects and I've categorized it kind of by object type. Med tree, let's go woodland mix. There you go. You notice automatically, I'm just going to take this out so it's not confusing. Automatically for medium A objects, it's interspersed these woodland double trees with woodland cone trees. And that looks kind of nice. I'm actually going to decrease those by a bit. It's a little too many for me. Yeah, those are mixes. Now, unfortunately, mixes won't show down here. You kind of just have to search for them. I know how terrible that sounds. But again, you can usually search by size and then the object type, and then it'll show you all the relevant mixes. I've done my best to make that as seamless as possible. Unfortunately, until Blender 3.2 comes out, I don't think it's going to get any smoother. So for now, if you're looking for a mix, just search the relevant type of object, med rock, med cacti, and you'll find something there. I'm just going to undo that. Perfect. All right, move on to the next thing. Right, what should I put in med B now that I've used a woodland mix to apply these two trees? Let's check our med rocks here. Ooh, I like this mossy boulder. And I know that those rocks actually come in collections of mossy and non-mossy ones. So I'm just going to go med rock. Let's find a mix here. Jungle or woodland boulder mix. That sounds perfect. And I'm going to increase the number here, and you can see they start to spawn. I'm just going to spawn a little too many, just to quickly show when align to slope comes in handy. So these are currently not aligning to slope, which is kind of hard to tell actually. These objects look pretty good. But you'll notice, let's say this one right here, it's not really, it's kind of just very flat, whereas boulders tend to ingrain themselves a little more naturally into the environment. So I'm just going to enable align to slope. And there we go. Now they're actually rotating themselves to align to the slope there. All right, let's decrease that by a bit. Scatter them a little bit more. There we go. Note that I don't often use these move options. They're there for convenience and for shaking things up, but definitely aren't essential. It really depends on what kind of scene you're trying to create. All right, moving on. Let's see, do I want any other rocks? No. Plants, yeah. My naming schemes are based on the first immediate thought. that comes to my mind. Oh, there's also a number, an object identifier there, but the rest of the name is absolutely just my first thought when I see that object there. So I hope you can handle them. All right, just changing some of these bushy bushes here. All right, that seems like a decent number of them. Let's just go spread them out just a little bit more. That's ideal. All right, now I'm going to cut a couple of these extra options. Normally I'd probably decorate my scene a little bit more, but I don't really want to deal with any more medium objects. Let's move on. I'm just going to take these out, set the number to 0, scatter to 1. That just makes sure that they don't mess up anything in the future, and also reduces some of the load times for the entire project. Skipping through the rest of the medium categories. Now notice, again, prioritization is important. The reason why I put these bushes after the woodland mix of trees is because if the two are competing for space, I want the woodland trees to show up over top, to show up instead. They're more important for me to visualize. The bushes can work around them. So if you notice, let's say, watch that guy, that little bush right there. If I increase the woodland mix enough, because it's a higher priority, it'll remove the bush as it sees fit. Just going to undo that, put him back, give him life. Yep, going down, just going to skip the rest of the medium options. They're there if you want to use them. I don't recommend over-decorating your scene, but some environments are naturally going to have a greater variety of objects, so it's there if you need it. Next, let's move to the small objects. Small rock wildy mix. Let's just change that. Let's just minimize some of these guys, open up our small objects. Let's start with our small trees. Do we want any small trees in here? I actually kind of like these dead trees here. I'm just going to drag those over in there. Nice. Maybe decrease them just by a bit. I don't want the environment looking that desolate. And let's spread them just a bit. There we go. I like that. Our priority B. Do I want any rocks? None of these really match woodland. Plant. Oh yes. Okay. Let's get some mushrooms in there. Oh, I already have small dead trees in there. Well, let's just take these guys out. And again, if there's a bunch of objects that are very similar to each other, there's likely a mix. So I'm just going to type in small plant, red mushroom mix. I like that. Now note that this search engine is actually pretty good. So if I go small shroom, you can probably find what you're looking for. Small fungi, even if that isn't the exact name, search engine is pretty flexible in what it'll read. So let's go with the red shroom mix here. That'll spread these two mushroom types. Just increase that. Ooh, that's a lot. Oh, I like that. Oh, they're so beautiful. Yeah, if you've never used Blender before, you can also enter rendered mode, which I'm currently using the render engine Eevee as I am on a laptop and in general have trouble with cycles. But this will actually apply the lighting effect, which by default I've given you a little sun right here. You can change that, play around with that if you so wish. But usually this makes the program run a little bit slower. So I'm just going to change back to material preview. Yes, our little mushrooms. Anything else I want to throw in here? Oh yeah, I definitely want some woodland fungi here. Let's get a couple of these guys in there. Yeah, so the scatter is really low. I put the scatter very low on the skeletons before. So I'm just going to increase that. That is a lot of fungi. So I cut down on those just a bit. Kind of hard to see. Hard to see at a distance. They blend in too well. All right. Anything else I want in here? Yeah, let's get some woodland bushes in there. Oh, yeah, if you're playing with the number and it's hard to, sometimes things don't appear to spawn. It's because the scatter might be set too low. Yeah, that's a lot. Let's see, up that scatter, cut down that number. Oh, I like that. Yeah, that is beautiful. All right, now moving on, we get to the 22s section. Now, object type 22 are anything that can go underneath other objects. So for example, these little rock slides can go underneath other rocks or underneath the trees here, on the cliffs. Those are your type 22s. And so if we open up the section of the asset manager for them, you can find quite a few 22s. So first, in my priority A, let's get some ferns in there. And I know these ferns are part of a mix. So I'm just going to go 22, I don't know, plant? Nope, those are red. Don't touch those. 22 fern. There we go. I don't know why I've called them flowers. They're flowers. Woodland fern mix. Let's put that in there. And you can see these beautiful ferns, which will spawn underneath other objects. They don't apply object collision. Let's just spread those out a bit. That's a lot. There we go. I like that. Next, sticks. I very rarely change sticks. But let's add a couple more. Let's add many sticks just to show you what they are. This is already a mix here, a mix of these two different sticks, the little guys here and the big guy here. So let's just cut that down a bit. There we go. Next, 22 rock slides. I do like having some rock slides, which are these little rocky guys right here. Looks like I've applied 2 rock slides here. I don't know why I would do that. Yes, so let's actually just, no, I don't want to remove that. Yeah, I do. I don't actually want these rock slides. Rock slides work better. Rock slides work in most environments, but especially with a woodland one. There's not too many rock slides on the ground unless there's a path. So let's go to grasses instead. Let's do 22 grass. Let's go the woodland mix here. And you notice that a lot of these objects here, you can't apply individually. And the reason being is that you never find this grass object in the environment alone. It's always mixed in with these larger clumps as well. So I just pretty much haven't enabled it that you can just drop this right in there because it's I don't know why you do that. I mean, if you really want to, I suppose you can, but I wouldn't. I suppose I can change that later if it's so desired. Let's get a good amount of grass in there. I do like my grass to clump just a bit. That looks a little more natural. So I'm just going to decrease our scatter just so they form in larger clumps here. That's perfect. Oh, I do like that. Okay. Any other type 22s I want in there? Maybe some flowers. Maybe some daisies. Wait, I can probably just drop that in. Daisies. Increase the number, just get them to scatter just a bit. Well, that's a lot. I'll make them clump just a tiny bit. And again, I probably should have applied the daisies before the grass because now the grass is taken away from these clumps of daisies, which doesn't look quite as nice, I don't think. But you know what? It's too late. Can't turn back now. You could actually, but I won't. I don't really want any other type 2s, though there's a lot of extra priorities I could use, E and F. I won't bother with those. Cliff 22 are specifically type 22s applied to the cliffs. So I'll almost only ever use rock slides for these, in which there's a lot. And just like the grasses, you can't apply these individually. There's pretty much never a reason. excuse me, never a reason why you'd want to. So let's go 22 rock slide. Let's go woodland dirt mix. And they'll blend a little more nicely, a little more naturally in there. Usually I don't change these parameters as cliffs don't change that much, but feel free to do so. All right, now moving on, we have the water objects, and they're indicated by water large, water medium, water small, so on and so forth. There's a lot fewer of these because there's a lot less objects in the game world that tend to go in the water, and you can technically mix and match these with the actual objects that go on the land. The reason why I've split them in the catalog here is just for clarity, just to kind of push you in a direction saying, well, normally trees don't go in the water, though I suppose if you really wanted to, you know, you do you, but generally doesn't make too much sense. Therefore, I've split it into water objects as well. So the water large objects, we have swamp roots and boats. Yeah, let's put a boat in there. Maybe cut down on the number of boats. Actually, I'm going to increase their scatter just a bit so that when we cut it down, it does a little more naturally. Oh, I kind of like that. Oh, I've lost it. Come on. There we go. Perfect. That is ideal. And actually, can I move it a little bit? This is where move might come in handy a little more. Oh, no, I'm changing the wrong one. Let's try to move this guy. Yeah, again, when objects are super scattered, they move a lot less predictably. This might not be that useful function. Oh. Yeah. Man-made objects, which are typically placed a lot more carefully, I'd probably just recommend you manually place them in. In the future, I'd love to do some something I'll probably call places, where you can indicate areas where you do a little more carefully crafted work, like a camp, for example, or I don't know, a little shrine with special stones around or whatever. That will work a little more predictably than just randomizing numbers, scatter, and move. And boats will probably be thrown in with that. For now, this is what you're getting. If you want to actually put a boat in the environment, you can. You can just find the object here, copy it, scale it down. Moving on, water medium objects. Let's see, I do like these seaweed rocks, and again, I know they come in a mix, so I'm just going to type in the size, wmed, rock, there we go, seaweed mix, perfect. Let's just increase those a bit, scatter them just a bit, let's scatter them a little more, beautiful. There we go, I like that. That looks pretty good. Any other water medium objects I want? There's only ice and rocks. There's not too many options. So let's just move down to water small objects. We have... Oh, yeah, let's get this small rock in there first. Up the scatter, up the number, scatter that more. Looks pretty nice. And yeah, let's get some lilies in there. Again, a lot of identical or similar objects. So I'm just going to go W small, there we go, W small plant, lily mix. That's down here. Just increase those by no. That looks good. Okay. There we go, a couple little lilies. Beautiful. And yeah, I don't think I'm going to use priority C. And the rest of these options we're not going to touch just yet. There we go. You've created your first landscape in NextGen from scratch, essentially. I know we used a preset, but we changed absolutely everything about it, so we'll call it from scratch. Now let's get into some of the more in-depth stuff, in which first let's start out with export to 2D we'll deal with later. Let's start out with the water flattener. So this water texture is very old school. Some people are going to want to replace it. My recommendation is create a plane and move the plane just a bit above. There we go. And you can change the plane to whatever texture, color, mesh you want to do. But there's a bit of a problem in that the water kind of climbs up the slope a bit. We can change that. So I'm just going to delete that guy right there. Again, to get the Modifiers tab showing again, I'll just click on our landscape, click away to get rid of the outline. Water flattener, where'd it go? Down at the very bottom here, as it suggests, flattens the water. There we go. Now, unless you're in ridiculously extreme elevations, the water should be perfectly flat. You can replace it with any plane you want, with any sort of mesh you want, with relative ease now. Yes, and now Runescape normally works by having water that does climb up slopes just a bit, but for the sake of changing it out, for something that might fit your blend a little bit better, we'll keep that. You can turn that on. Shade terrain smooth. This, right, we should have a conversation about shaders. So I've done these default shaders with a very cursed format. And the reason for this is very specific. It's because I want to see individual tiles. This is how the normal game is normally shaded, in that you can see all the individual tiles, and they don't blend very well unless you use something like a Rune-like plugin. So you see these very distinct patterns and very distinct tiles or squares. You might not like that, and there's a couple ways you can change that out. First off, you can turn on Shade Terrain Smooth. So turn that on, and there you go. All the terrain is now smooth shaded, including the water and the cliffs. Again, you can turn that off if you so desire. You can also go into the actual Shaders tab, and this is, again, if you know what you're kind of doing in Blender, find the correct land that you want. So land, let's just open this up a bit, woodland. And you can change this setup here. Now, when looking at these tabs, I see two tabs and two tabs only. I see layout and I see geometry nodes. None of these ones in between or outside make any sense to me. So I don't know what I'm doing with shaders. You probably know a lot more than I do. So I'd recommend you just wipe the slate clean here and start from scratch. That'll probably give you a much smoother experience. I'm not going to go much else into the shaders. I would not recommend touching any of these water textures or cliff textures. You're asking for a lot of trouble if you're doing that, so please, for your sake and mine, don't touch those. Anything else down here? Yes, that's the quick talk about shaders. Export to 2D. No, let's talk about advanced terrain control first. So as I mentioned before, some of these presets have advanced terrain control set to on. And if I do set it to on, things are going to change. First off, these four basic modifiers no longer control the environment. These no longer change anything. So don't bother playing with these. Instead, go to the Geometry Nodes tab and make sure this is selected. Again, you want to make sure it's the preset we've chosen. I know we've chosen the woodland, but it's still technically the wilderness preset. In this red box here, which if you're ever lost, which it's easy to get lost here. It's in the bottom left. This red box right here includes our advanced terrain controls. So if you know anything about geometry nodes, you can change the setup to whatever you want. But I'm going to leave it as I've said, default. You can play with these parameters and get some very, very neat looking terrain. Let me just change some of that. Actually, no, let's change the Musgrave texture here. There we go. That looks interesting. There's a lot of things you can play with here, and I'm not going to go into intense detail because I only have a rough idea how this all works. I play a lot of trial and error to get the kind of landscape that I want to see, but all of these things can be changed, and they will make big impacts on your terrain. This is how you get really interesting terrain features. Therefore, when I play with this program, for the most part, I will almost always stick with advanced terrain generation because you just get really interesting stuff, and I much prefer that to the basic terrain controls. Again, I'm not going to go in intense detail on how exactly this works, as I only have rough ideas. I just play trial and error, just like the rest of you probably will. Anyway, those are your advanced terrain controls. I'm just going to turn that back off. Get our old basic terrain back. Yes, one of the, before we even get there, adding your own objects. So if you notice, there's a lot of objects here, and if you visualize them, I've disabled them from rendering, so when you hit render, they won't show, but you can find them here. Now the actual scale factor, when you import an object from, let's say, either RuneLite or from the cache, I set the scale to 0.001, and then I apply it to the landscape, and there's another scaling factor that occurs in the landscape, and I can't actually remember what it is. So let's say you're adding your own character, your own model. The scale factor you'll want to use is, you want to scale it down by 0.001 and then again by 0.12. So however that math works out, I suppose I could figure it out with the calculator here, but I'm a little lazy. So 0.001, 0.12 when you import the object, and that'll get it to the exact same scale as the landscape here. If you're looking to put stuff in the landscape, if you're looking to spread stuff, like I've done here, these oak trees here are being applied on the landscape. You just want to set the scale factor to 0.001, leave it at that. And to do so, well, I'll just indicate the size. This is the size that an imported object will usually be at. So you can just hit scale 0.001, enter, and that'll give you the correct size. Oh no, I messed my formula up somewhere, but trust me, 0.001 is the right number. Yes, so what if you want to not manually add objects? Because I can take this and I can put it in the scene as I so desire, or a character I can manually put him in the scene. But what if you want to spread an object around in the geometry node setup? How do you actually create that? Well, I'm just going to create a duplicate of this guy right here to use as a sample. Let me just get him out of here. Let's say I've just imported this guy, scaled him properly to 0.001, and now I want to spread him around with instead of these oak trees. You need to make a collection first of all. And where'd that collection go? Went to the bottom here. It has to be in a collection, and as you can see, I normally name my collections for very specific reasons. You don't have to yourself. It helps me, and it helps me make sure that when I translate stuff to you guys, it all makes sense and the search engine works smoothly, but you really don't have to. Let's say I'll just call this collection Stump. Now you can actually enter that in into the into the node setup here, into the modifiers. So let's say I go here, I just want to search for a stump. There we go, and it works. Oh, there's so much more I had to say there. Yes, so that works fine. If you really want to make it easy for others to use, you can use the same naming scheme as I have. But again, you don't have to. Now, one very important feature of version 1.2 is the ability to export your map to a 2D version, kind of like the world map or in-game mini map. And that is what this controls. This is going to connect back to our collections in a second, so just hold on one moment. So 0 is off, and as indicated by the tooltip here, which I should probably have said about an hour ago now, tooltips are very handy. They describe things. Recommend you read it if you don't know, or just come back to this tutorial, I suppose. So 0 is off. 1 will show all the objects to export. Now, immediately you'll notice here, this uses all the sprites that the in-game minimap or world map uses. So essentially what we do is we take an image of this, and we can take it to an image modifying program. I'll take it to GIMP myself to put the different components together. So this is the object export. This is the underlay export, so the landscape beneath any, well, if I just turn it back here, it's the landscape not including any sort of cliffs or water. And then you have the overlay, which includes cliffs and water. Yes, so when we export this map into a two-dimensional version, we need to export 3 different images, the objects, the underlay, and the overlay. There's a couple reasons why these are exported differently, and partially it's just future ease of use. If you want to modify one layer and not touch another, you can do so in your image editing program of choice. And that comes to going back again. The only reasons these guys show up is because the collections are set up so. So if we were to introduce this stump collection that I've created here, let's say I were to introduce it instead of the oak trees, which oak trees, some of these triangular trees are going to be oaks. So you'll notice as soon as these change to the stump, they disappear. That is obviously a little bit problematic because now our large stumps, which should exist in our world, there you go, there's a lot of them, they're not appearing in the 2D export. So what we want to actually do there is we want to make sure that we've tied a map scene or a map sprite to that collection. And the map scenes are right here. And for a stump, I know that the stump map scene is probably going to be a dead tree here. You can see it right here. I'm just going to hit Shift M to move a copy of that to the stump folder. There you go. You probably just noticed. Let me just undo that, redo. There you go. All our stumps will now apply the appropriate map scene. And you notice in our stump collection, the first object is going to be the map scene, and the second one is going to be the stump. And that's how to make new objects that you're spreading on the map apply to the 2D export. I'm just going to go and hide that again. Don't need to see that. Oh no, what happened? Let's see. There we go. There we go. So now let's actually export this to 2D. Now the export is currently set up to apply for a map scale of 1. You're going to have to change some parameters if you're trying to export a map of any other size. It's relatively easy to do so, you just need to know how to do so. But for now, we're just going to stick with the very basics. So I've set my export to 2D to option 1 here. And up here, you can find my 2D export maps. So again, we're exporting objects, so we're going to enable in view and in render the object export map, and that will cause this guy right here to appear. What we can do from there is we can hit the top, the terrain map. One second, I don't know why these trees are still here. Make those disappear. Yes, so select the top image, shift left click the bottom image, go over here to our render properties, make sure the render engine is in cycles, scroll down to bake, and hit bake. Now, especially because I'm on a laptop, this might take a little bit of time, but usually not too long. And you notice if you go into your UV editor, let's just get out of edit mode, select the bottom one here. Oh, is it not going to show? Well, that's unfortunate. Again, I don't understand this tab. Oh, wait, we had it there. There we go. There's the image that we've constructed. I think it's actually copied 3 times, but that's fine. We're just going to hit save, and sure, I'll just save it to my downloads folder. All right, so that we've just exported the objects to 2D. Let's go back to our terrain, and let's go next to the underlays. And we're just going to go and make this object map disappear and disable it from render. Make the underlays appear, enable it for render, and just as before, left click the top, shift left click the bottom, render properties, make sure we're in cycles, and hit bake. There we go. Now if we look at the map, we can look at it from the underside. We've just created the underlay 2D map. Now I'm just going to go into my textures here. Just going to find the 2D exporter for underlays. There we go. Again, it's copied 3 times here. Hit save. I'll just save it to the same folder. And last piece here, we're just going to go back to our Modifiers tab for the terrain. Scroll all the way down. Let's get our overlays. Make the underlay 2D export map disappear. Overlays appear. Enable and render. Select the top. Shift, select the bottom. Render properties, bake. And there we go. This one comes out a little scuffed and is going to need a little bit of work in your image modifying software, but that's fine. Let's just find it here. 2D exporter for overlays. Save, and sure, I'll just leave it as the default name. Okay, so let's move over to our image modifying program. All right, so I'm just going to take those 3 images we took, and I'm going to place them all in GIMP here. GIMP is free, so I highly recommend using it. Very powerful tool. So first things first, let's just place these properly. Underlays at the bottom, overlays on top, and objects at the top of those. Open this up just a bit more. Make these guys disappear. Underlays exports as a map that is significantly smaller than the other ones, and there's a reason for this. Let's see, what's the scale going to be? Quick calculator check. 256. Yes, okay. Yes, there's a very specific reason that the underlay specifically exports a lot smaller. And the reason being is because these tiles here, I've set to 4 by 4. We want these each of these tiles to occupy 4 by 4 pixels. And if you export at the same size as these other guys, there's going to be a lot of intricacies and nuances and contours to the terrain that doesn't actually properly mimic how the old school map generates its terrain. So in order to avoid that, we export as a 4 times smaller underlay map and then scale it to 4 times to match the rest. You don't need to make any other changes to the underlays, so we'll just leave it there. Overlays, we're going to want to change. I'm just going to hit Shift-O to select by color. Decrease that a bit just in case. Oh, get the right layer. Yeah, let's delete all this pink. And all this black area here also needs to go. It's going to Shift Select to get a little bit more of that. Again, it's a... Oh, no, let's not. Let's undo that. Again, it does need a little bit of work, just because the export process isn't perfect. There we go. I'm just going to actually select the rest of this, broaden the threshold a bit, select all my water, hit O to color pick, the water color there, Shift B to use my paint can, fill whole selection, all the blue that I've selected, and fill that in. So you notice, I'll just undo that. We don't want all this little shadowy stuff here. The old school world map makes it all perfectly monochromatic. Same with the cliff here. It's going to shift. I'm just going to color pick that. That was Shift O. Leave the threshold relatively high. Press O to pick this brown color. Shift B to fill, paint bucket, and select. Notice there's a little bit of weird. Yeah, this needs to go. That doesn't look right. There we go. Actually, I'm just going to make that disappear. Make sure this looks all nice and smooth. It's all nice and monochromatic. That looks beautiful. Reshow that. Easy one is the objects. We just need to Shift O, set that threshold relatively low, get all the pink, hit delete. And there we go. There's your map. Yeah, it looks all right. I'll probably in the future need to play with some of these shaders here. It looks a little bit strange how some of the underlay is being applied. But altogether, I think it looks pretty all right. And if you want to make your own buildings or whatever, you can just do that over top and delete objects or change the contour of the overlays as you so please. It takes a little bit of skill with image editing, but this at least gives you a nice base to work off of. Coming back to Blender, what happens when you change the world size and you want to export that map to 2D? So let's say I change the world size to 2. First off, this is kind of a dud now. I've actually undone a couple of things just to try and get some of our prior maps back. So let's go back to the underlays here. I've not rendered this, or I've undone the render, so it's now back to black instead of showing the underlay map. First of all, you need to change the size of the object appropriately. So I've changed the world size to 2. I need to scale the underlay map by 2. Hit enter. Sorry, just to show that again, I'll Control Z. S to scale, 2, enter. Just so it's the same size, I also need to press Control A to scale, apply scale. That is very important. Next, when you go to the textures, you go to the underlays, you need to make sure that these scale appropriately. So I've scaled the entire map by 2. I need to change this by 2. So it needs to go up to 128. And you need to do the same thing if you were to, say, do the overlay map. Scale it properly, so S, I'm scaling to 2, enter, need to Control A to apply scale. And I need to change the texture. Again, texture tab down here to the overlays. This needs to be doubled. So let's go 512. Very important. That way the map will export properly for you. Other than that, I think that's the entirety of the tutorial. I don't think I have much else to show you. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask away. I'm always willing to help. Yeah, just find me. Social media will be linked down below. Other than that, please enjoy the program. I spent a lot of time making it, so I sure hope it gets at least a little bit of mileage out there, and I hope to see a lot of cool creations from all you guys down the future. Anyways, thank you very much, and have a great day.